I saw Muslims in hell. My near-death experience changed everything. I never thought my life would take such a drastic turn. Like many people, I believed that I was living according to a divine plan, following the teachings of my faith, doing what I thought was right. But that all changed on that fateful day. It was supposed to be just another business trip to New York, a routine flight, and meetings with investors. I had worked hard to build my company, to ensure my success and provide for my family. In my mind, I was living the dream, pursuing wealth and success while keeping my faith intact. But it wasn't until I stood at the brink of death that I realized how far I had strayed. That day, everything changed. We were driving back to the hotel after a long day of meetings when the accident happened. It was as if time slowed down, the screech of the tires, the sudden impact, the feeling of weightlessness as the car spun out of control. In those seconds, all I could think about was my family. Would I ever see them again? Would I survive? My heart pounded as I felt myself being thrown forward, and then, nothing. There was a moment of absolute silence, a void so deep it was almost comforting. I felt a strange calmness wash over me, as if I were floating in an endless sea. But then, that calmness was shattered. I began to feel an overwhelming pull, dragging me into a dark, suffocating place. It was unlike anything I had ever imagined, darker than the darkest night, heavier than the heaviest burden. I could hear faint sounds in the distance, cries of anguish, the echoes of tortured souls. My heart raced, but my body felt frozen, as if I were trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The darkness was closing in on me, suffocating me, and that's when I saw them. Out of the shadows emerged figures I recognized. They were dressed in traditional Muslim attire, men, women, even children. Their faces were contorted in agony, their eyes filled with a pain so deep it was unbearable to witness. They were reaching out, clawing at the darkness, begging for salvation. I knew these people. They were from my community. I had prayed with them, broken bread with them, shared moments of faith and spirituality with them. But here they were, trapped in this endless torment. At first, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. These were devout Muslims, people who had followed the teachings of Islam, people who had lived righteous lives. What were they doing here? Why were they in this place of torment and suffering? I tried to move, to reach out to them, but my body refused to respond. All I could do was watch as they were consumed by the darkness, their cries growing louder, more desperate. My mind raced. Was this hell? Was this the afterlife? I had always believed in heaven and hell, but this was something far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. I could feel my own soul being pulled towards the darkness, and I knew that if I didn't do something, I would be lost too. I tried to pray, to recite the verses of the Quran that I had memorized, but the words wouldn't come. My faith, which had once been my anchor, felt distant, hollow. In that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to simply follow the rituals, to say the prayers, to observe the fasts. There was something deeper, something more profound that I had missed. And as I stood there, watching the souls of those I had known, I understood. This was a place for those who had lost their way, not in their actions, but in their hearts. They had followed the outward forms of faith, but inside, they had become hollow. Their lives had been consumed by the pursuit of material wealth, status, and power, just like mine. Just as I began to sink into despair, a light appeared. It was faint at first, a distant glimmer in the vast darkness, but it grew brighter and brighter until it enveloped me. I felt a presence, powerful, yet comforting. It was as if this light were alive, and it was speaking to me, not with words, but with a deep, resonating understanding. I knew that this was a messenger of divine justice, here to show me the truth. The voice that echoed in my soul told me that the people I had seen were not condemned because of their faith. No, they were here because they had lost the essence of that faith. They had allowed spiritual poverty to take root in their hearts. They had become obsessed with the outward symbols of religion, wealth, status, and rigid adherence to dogma, while neglecting the true purpose of faith, love, compassion, and justice. My heart sank as I realized that I was no different. I had lived my life in pursuit of success, thinking that as long as I prayed, fasted, and gave to charity, I was doing enough. But in reality, I had been neglecting the most important part of my soul. As I stood in the presence of this divine light, I was filled with a deep sense of shame. But the light did not condemn me. Instead, it offered me a choice. I could continue down the path I had been on, consumed by materialism and spiritual emptiness, or I could change. I could choose to live a life of true faith, one that was centered on love, compassion, and justice. I knew in that moment that I had to change. There was no other option. With that realization, the light began to fade, and I was pulled back into my body. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body aching, but my soul shaken to its core. The doctors told me that I had been clinically dead for a few minutes, but those minutes had felt like an eternity. As I lay there, recovering, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The faces of those souls in torment haunted me, their cries echoing in my mind. I knew I couldn't go back to the life I had been living. Something had to change. The first thing I did was reach out to religious leaders in my community. I needed to understand what had happened to me to make sense of the vision I had experienced. But their responses left me feeling even more lost. They told me that what I had seen was just a product of my mind, that near-death experiences were common and didn't hold any real meaning. They dismissed my vision as a hallucination, a symptom of my trauma. But I knew, deep down, that it was more than that. It was a message, a warning. I started to question everything, my faith, my purpose, my understanding of life and death. I spent hours in prayer, seeking guidance, but the answers didn't come easily. The more I searched, the more I realized that the path I had been on was leading me away from the truth. I had been so focused on building my business, on securing my financial future, that I had lost sight of what truly mattered. My faith had become a checklist of rituals, devoid of the compassion and love that should have been at its core. As the days passed, I felt increasingly disconnected from my old life. My family noticed the change in me, but they didn't understand. How could they? I didn't fully understand it myself. All I knew was that I couldn't continue living the way I had been. I began to withdraw from the business world, slowly distancing myself from the relentless pursuit of wealth and success that had once driven me. Instead, I sought out communities of faith, hoping to find others who shared my desire for a deeper, more meaningful connection to God. That's when I met a group of people who spoke about a different kind of faith, one that wasn't about rigid adherence to dogma or the pursuit of material wealth, but about compassion, justice, and love for all of humanity. They called it an inner conversion, a transformation of the heart and soul. It resonated with me in a way that nothing else had. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was on the right path. But this new path wasn't easy. Many of the people I had once called friends began to distance themselves from me. They didn't understand why I was turning away from the success and wealth I had worked so hard to achieve. Some even accused me of losing my faith, of betraying the very community that had supported me. It was painful, but I knew that I couldn't go back. The vision I had experienced was too powerful to ignore. The more I embraced this new way of life, the more I began to feel a sense of peace. I was no longer driven by the need for success or approval from others. Instead, I focused on living a life of compassion, of helping those who were struggling, both spiritually and materially. I started volunteering at a local community center, working with people who had been marginalized and forgotten. It was there that I began to understand the true meaning of faith. Faith, I realized, wasn't about following a set of rules or rituals. It wasn't about wearing the right clothes or saying the right prayers. It was about living a life of love and compassion, about seeking justice for those who couldn't fight for themselves. It was about recognizing the humanity in every person, no matter their race, religion, or background. This was the faith that I had been missing for so long, the faith that the people I had seen in my vision had lost. As I continued on this journey, I began to share my story with others. I wanted them to know that there was more to life than the pursuit of wealth and status, that there was a deeper, more meaningful way to live. At first, many people were skeptical. They didn't believe in near-death experiences, or they thought that my vision was just a hallucination. But as I spoke from my heart, I could see the impact it was having. People began to open up, to question their own lives, their own faith. I knew that I couldn't change the world overnight, but I was determined to make a difference, even if it was just in my small corner of the world. Together with a few like-minded individuals, I helped establish a spiritual center focused on healing and reconciliation. It wasn't about converting people to a particular religion or following a specific set of beliefs. It was about helping people find their own path to God, their own way of living a life of love and compassion. The impact of the center was profound. People from all walks of life came to us, seeking guidance, healing, and understanding. Some had lost their faith entirely, while others were struggling to reconcile their beliefs with the challenges of the modern world. We welcomed them all, offering a space where they could explore their spirituality without fear of judgment or condemnation. It was here that I found my true purpose. Looking back now, I can see that my near-death experience was the catalyst for everything that followed. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that life is fragile and that we must use our time on this earth wisely. It showed me that true faith is not about following rules or accumulating wealth, but about living a life of compassion, justice, and love. It's about reaching out to others, offering them a hand when they're struggling, and helping them find their own way to the light. The journey hasn't been easy, but it has been worth it. Every day, I strive to live according to the lessons I learned in that dark, suffocating place. Every day, I remind myself that faith is not about what we say or how we appear, but about what we do and how we love. There were moments during this transformation that I questioned everything. The memory of the darkness I had seen still haunted me at times, creeping into my thoughts when I least expected it. It wasn't just the sight of the tormented souls that troubled me, but the realization of how easy it is to lose the essence of faith while believing you are on the right path. I would often sit in quiet reflection, wondering how many people around me were living the same way I had been, convinced that they were doing enough, unaware of the spiritual poverty slowly consuming them. But each time those thoughts threatened to overwhelm me, I would remind myself of the light. That light, so powerful and pure, had given me a second chance. It had offered me a choice, and I had chosen to live differently. There was peace in knowing that I was now on a path that aligned with the deeper truths of my soul. Yet, that peace didn't come without struggle. As my personal transformation deepened, the tension between my new life and my old one became harder to ignore. Family gatherings, once filled with laughter and shared stories of success, began to feel foreign to me. Conversations that used to excite me, talks of business deals, investments, and career advancements, now felt hollow. My brothers, still immersed in the business world, often looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. To them, I had turned away from everything we had worked so hard to build. They didn't understand why I would give up a thriving career, why I no longer seemed interested in the trappings of wealth and status. One evening, my older brother, Ahmed, sat me down after a family dinner. His face was tense, his eyes searching mine for answers he hadn't been able to find on his own. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "We built something great together, something that could set us up for life, for generations. And now, you're just walking away? What happened to you?" I looked at him, understanding his frustration but also feeling a deep sadness that he couldn't see what I had come to understand. How could I explain to him that the pursuit of material wealth, while not inherently wrong, had consumed us? How could I make him see that the business, once a symbol of our hard work and determination, had become a prison for my soul? "I'm not walking away," I said softly. "I'm just walking towards something different." He shook his head, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. "Something different? What does that even mean?" "You've changed, man. You used to be ambitious, driven. Now, it's like you don't care about any of it." I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I care, Ahmed. I care more than I ever have. But I've realized that there's more to life than what we've been chasing. After the accident, after what I saw, I couldn't go back to living the same way. I can't explain it fully, but something inside me shifted. It's like I've been given a second chance, and I don't want to waste it." Ahmed's expression softened, but I could see the confusion still lingering in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily. "A second chance at what? You're a good man. You've always been faithful. You prayed, you fasted, you gave to charity. What more is there?" I paused, knowing that this was the heart of the matter. Faith is more than just rituals, Ahmed. It's more than checking boxes and following rules. It's about how we live, how we treat others, how we carry the compassion and love that God asks of us. I was doing all the right things on the outside, but inside, I was empty. My life was about success, about making more money, achieving more, but I had lost sight of what really matters. Ahmed was quiet for a moment, and I could see him wrestling with my words. I knew he was trying to understand, but it was hard for him to see beyond the life we had built together. He stood up slowly, placing a hand on my shoulder as he did. "I don't get it," he admitted, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." That conversation stayed with me for a long time. I knew Ahmed cared about me, and I knew he was trying to make sense of the changes he saw in me. But it was hard to explain something so profound, something that went beyond the material world we had always known. It wasn't just about turning away from wealth or success, it was about turning towards something deeper, something more meaningful. It was about living a life that reflected the values I had always claimed to believe in, but had rarely truly embodied. The spiritual center we established became my refuge, a place where I could immerse myself in this new life and help others who were seeking the same kind of transformation. It wasn't a large place, just a modest building in the heart of the community, but it was filled with people who had experienced their own forms of loss, their own crises of faith. We came from different walks of life, different religious backgrounds, but we were united in our search for something deeper, something that transcended the superficial. I remember one man who came to us, a father who had lost his daughter in a tragic accident. He was a devout Muslim, and for years his faith had been his foundation. But after his daughter's death, he felt abandoned by God. He couldn't understand why something so terrible would happen to someone so young and innocent. He had lost all sense of purpose, all connection to his faith. He sat across from me one evening, tears streaming down his face as he told me his story. His pain was palpable, his grief so raw that I could feel it in the room. I prayed every day, he whispered, his voice trembling. I did everything right. I followed every rule, every tradition. And yet, she's gone. How can this be God's will? I looked at him, my heart breaking for his loss. I don't have the answers, I said gently. I can't tell you why things happen the way they do. But I do know this: faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting that even in the darkest moments, there is still light. It's about believing that love and compassion can carry us through the pain. He shook his head, his eyes filled with anguish. But how? How do I find that light when all I feel is darkness? I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would be difficult for him to hear. You have to let go of the idea that faith will protect you from suffering. It won't. Faith doesn't promise us a life free from pain. What it promises is that, even in our suffering, we are not alone. God is with us, not in the sense that He will take away our pain, but in the sense that He will give us the strength to carry it. He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do that. I nodded, understanding his hesitation. It's not easy. And it doesn't happen overnight. But if you can find even a small sliver of hope, if you can hold on to the belief that there is still love in the world, even in the midst of your pain, that's the beginning. Over time, I saw him return to the center, little by little finding his way back to his faith. It wasn't the same faith he had before, it was deeper, more nuanced, tempered by his grief but also strengthened by his resilience. He had learned, as I had, that faith isn't about avoiding suffering, but about finding meaning in the midst of it. Stories like his became the lifeblood of the spiritual center. Each person who walked through our doors brought with them their own struggles, their own questions, and we welcomed them all with open arms. We didn't have all the answers, but we had the compassion to sit with them in their pain, to listen without judgment, and to offer whatever solace we could. As time went on, I realized that my own healing was deeply connected to the healing of those around me. The more I helped others, the more I felt my own soul being restored. It was as if, in giving love and compassion to others, I was also giving it to myself. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept back in, moments when the weight of my past mistakes, the vision of those lost souls, resurfaced in my mind. But each time, I reminded myself of the light I had seen, the choice I had been given. I had chosen to live differently, and that choice, while difficult, was the only path that led to true peace. One evening, as I was closing up the center for the night, I stood outside, looking up at the stars. The night was calm, the air cool against my skin. I thought about everything that had happened since that day in New York, the accident, the vision, the transformation that had followed. It had been a long, winding journey, filled with moments of doubt and fear, but also moments of profound clarity and peace. I had come to realize that the journey of faith is never truly finished. It's not a destination, but a constant unfolding, a continuous process of growth and discovery. There will always be challenges, always be moments when we question our path, but if we stay true to the core values of compassion, love, and justice, we will always find our way back to the light. As I stood there, a sense of deep gratitude washed over me. I was grateful for the second chance I had been given, grateful for the people who had walked this journey with me, and most of all, grateful for the lessons I had learned. Faith, I had come to understand, is not about perfection. It's about striving to live in a way that reflects the love and compassion that God has for all of us. It's about recognizing our own flaws and failures, but choosing to rise above them and live with purpose and intention. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that uncertainty. I didn't need to have all the answers. All I needed was to keep walking, one step at a time, toward the light.